Sorry, while the cell phone announcement was being made, I was going to turn off my cell phone, which was going off, and I should know better. My name is Ron. I'm Ralph's son. I have the privilege of also working as a rabbi. And so then I have the honor of being able to not only bring my knowledge and skills as a rabbi to this moment, but to serve as to speak about my father as well. So it's a privilege, and it's also a burden, and it's also on some level, in my opinion, a wonderful thing to be able to do, to have that level of awareness for the person who's died and to be able to speak as someone who's known him for, well, for my entire life, for 63 years. So we'll begin with some readings. And also I would like to add, thank you for being here. We appreciate your presence and your willingness and ability to listen to our family as we share our stories about our brother, our father, our husband, all those pieces. Our grandfather, our great-grandfather. I'd like to begin by inviting my children, Ellie and Noah, to come forward, parents of the first two great-grandchildren.
Death cannot sever our connections to those we have lost. The soul is eternal and can never be extinguished. But not only the soul survives the grave, the bonds of love are stronger than death. The lessons that our loved ones taught us, their goodness, their deeds, their wisdom will remain with us always. They have left a permanent imprint upon our souls that can never be erased. They continue to guide us wherever we go.
Most people think heaven is a far-off place, but perhaps heaven is closer than we think. Perhaps our loved ones are with us. Perhaps they are silently watching over us and sheltering us and guiding our steps. I believe that we are surrounded by the loving presence of those we have loved and lost. May they continue to be with us. May they bless us and inspire us to goodness in death as they did in life.
So as a rabbi, I've taught rabbinic students how to lead funerals. I have a repository of resources and literature that I share. And I did what rabbis do with siblings. I sent my sister a packet of all of my funeral readings. And I said, okay, Sharon, pick one that you'd like. And so she picked the one that my kids just read. And it was her way of capturing that moment. I'd like to invite my uncle and my father's brother, Robbie Stern, to come forward.
My brother Ralph was 7 years older than me. His early years were dramatically different from mine. I deeply believe Ralph deserves a great deal of honor and admiration, not only for the good things that you're going to hear about him from his kids and his grandkids, but for his perseverance and resilience as a human being who was born under difficult circumstances. I want to share with you what I view as significant parts of his story. Ralph was born in Germany on May 17th, 1937, as the Nazis were consolidating their power over the German government and German society. Our parents, Manfred and Ina, I am sure lived in constant fear as the Nazis were voicing and putting into action the most hate-filled, violent anti-Semitism. As a baby and a toddler, Ralph no doubt felt the fear and terror his parents and perhaps his grandmother were feeling as they tried to live their lives among people who were wearing swastikas. In the fall of 1938, the knock on the door happened, and our father was taken away to Sachsenhausen, a slave labor concentration camp. This is the same concentration camp where Dad's mom, Minna, our grandmother, would be murdered by the Nazis. Our moms determined that they must finally get out of Germany. Our grandmother, Minna, was still in Germany, and she insisted she would not leave until Dad, Mom, Ralph, and his 5 other siblings were safe out of Germany. With Ralph's father in the camp, Mom left baby Ralph, with whom we don't know, and went to the American Embassy to try and secure a visa for Dad, Mom, and Ralph. She described the huge crowds of Jews and possibly others outside the US Embassy also trying to secure visas. She knew she needed to do something that allowed her to stand out. She noticed the American consul had the same last name as her parents, Teller. According to the story we were told, she went home and somehow got on the phone and suggested maybe they were related. According to our mother, the consul assured her that they were not related, but said he had noticed she was a stunningly beautiful woman, had noticed her and invited her to meet with him in the embassy. She went back to the American consulate and somehow managed to secure visas for Dad, Ralph, herself, and another family who had asked her assistance. My mom had to leave Ralph again, or take him with her, we don't know, and go to the Nazi-controlled German agency handling immigration and show them the US visas to get a German passport, which we still have. We do not know what happened. We do not know what additional steps she had to take to gain her husband's release, but whatever they were, she took them. Then the fearful waiting continued until another knock on the door. And there was Ralph's dad, who my mother described as a skeleton of his former self. He was physically, emotionally, psychologically a shell of the strong athlete he once was. More terror was ahead for the family of three. Mom described that she had been walking Ralph in a stroller, and a kind German policeman in their neighborhood got to know them. He knew Dad had just gotten out of the camp and warned Mom that on a night very soon, Nazi thugs would riot and beat every Jewish man they could get their hands on. He urged Mom to get Dad out of town. I was with Ralph the night we heard this story from Mom for the first time. Mom had to make a Sophie's choice, an impossible choice. She decided to leave Ralph with a Gentile babysitter and take Dad to a city where they would not known and where they would spend the evening walking around as two young lovers while Kristallnacht occurred. The apartment was broken into by the thugs. The apartment was trashed and belongings were stolen. Ralph was not physically harmed, but I cannot imagine how that wonderful little 18-month-old toddler must have felt as these monsters trashed his home and his safety. Our parents came back, picked up Ralph, and they hid for some period of time in the warehouse where some of the belongings they were taking with them were stored. Did they have to keep Ralph quiet? What was the level of fear for them as they waited for their ticketed ship? On that ship, Mom and Dad decided they would never talk about their lives in Nazi Germany and their terror, but would put those memories behind them to make a new life. This was Ralph's first 2 years of life. Sorry, my fingers are getting stuck on the page here. They became non-English speaking refugees in the US. Life was very tough. Both parents got quite sick when they landed in New York. Mom had a sister living in New York City, and they sponsored the small family until they could make their way to Richmond, Virginia, where Mom's parents lived. We can only guess that Ralph began acclimating to a new country, a new language, and a new world. Dad was trying to make enough money to get his mom out of Germany, but he also had a family to feed and memories to repress. And his mom, our grandmother, was murdered before he could save her life. This was another huge blow to my dad and more emotions to repress. And all of this has a lot to do with the kind of father he was to Ralph and later to me. Once Dad had enough English, he got a job as a traveling salesman, selling children's clothes in North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. The family of three moved to Charlotte, North Carolina, to be closer to his territory, but still a drivable distance from Richmond. They were poor, and Dad was gone all week, returning on the weekend. Neighbors were knitting booties, and Dad took them with him on the road and split the proceeds of those sales with the ones that produced the booties. Ralph began to go to school, and from what I was told, our parents were very strict with him. 2 months after Ralph's seventh birthday in 1944, I was born as a child of hope and a spit in the eye of Hitler. I was told by a very important person in our lives that Ralph actually performed front flips of joy when he heard I was born and coming home to be his little brother. I obviously did not actually see this feat, but I was told, and I'm going to tell you who told me. Ethel Goldman was the woman hired by my parents to care for Ralph and me when they were working. I found out as an adult that Ethel had a business on the side selling moonshine her cousin was making in South Carolina. She was a spirited and loving person and was very important in both of our lives. The joy Ralph expressed, I'm sure, diminished when he realized I was sticking around and would become old enough to be a pest in his life. Dad and Mom were building up a textile business as a result of more and more sales of baby booties, and they bought a postage-size building where they began to manufacture children's clothing, following through on Dad's education in Germany as a textile apprentice. They bought a small house, and Ralph and I shared a room. He was my hero, saving me from my childhood nighttime terrors. I remember a game called I'm the Head and You're the Tail. It was basically follow the leader, and Ralph was mostly the leader. And when it was my turn to be the head, my tail, that is Ralph, would disappear. I would look around and he wasn't there. I was so frustrated. Ralph saved me from bullies in the neighborhood and was my idol. I heard stories about how my dad would strap Ralph with a belt, and I hated the idea, but also found it terrifying. We moved to a larger home, and Ralph and I no longer shared a room. I'm sure that was a relief for him. We had a small Jewish community in Charlotte, and Ralph's social circle, like mine, were the small collection of Jewish kids. And when Ralph turned 13, he became active in AZA and BBYO. He had girlfriends, and I thought that was so cool. I would sneak, when he had friends over, I would sneak under the dining room table or hide under the piano until he saw me, and then he would run me off with threats of what he would do to me. When he got his driver's license, he was the coolest dude ever. Actually, at that time, it was called the coolest cat ever. I would ride shotgun with the window open and feel like I was a big shot. Ralph was the greatest driver I ever knew. He was big and strong from my perspective, and when a high school football coach tried to recruit him to play football, my father said absolutely not. That was a heartbreak for Ralph. Dad decided Ralph should take over the business, and he was never really given the opportunity to think about whether he might like to do something else. Dad cemented that decision by giving Ralph a car if he agreed to go to North Carolina State in their textile program. I do remember a glorious driving trip I took with Ralph to Staten Island, New York, to the home of the Bentzes, their oldest child being Fran. It was prior to all of us going to Camp B'nai B'rith. The spark of love began to develop at Camp B'nai B'rith and ultimately led to the wedding in 1959 after Ralph graduated Wharton School of Business and served time in the Air National Guard in Texas. Ralph and Fran moved to Charlotte and had two wonderful kids, Ron and Sharon, with Dan following 6 years later. Ralph had the unfortunate experience of having to work under the supervision of my dad. Without going into details, it was a demeaning experience and ended inevitably in a rupture of the relationship between Ralph and my dad. He carried his anger at my dad and my mom for not being protective of him to his final days. Ralph and I had our interpersonal challenges as adults, but much to Ralph's credit, we found our way to a good brotherhood, speaking frequently on the phone, visiting, and sharing each other's family occasions. My last visit with Ralph in person was very profound for me. Ralph was in hospice and sleeping a lot. We were asked by Daria if we could record Ralph speaking a line that Daria had selected to be played at her and Buddha's wedding. I woke Ralph. My son Jacob and I explained a couple of times that what Daria wanted him to do. Jacob took the lead in recording him when he delivered the line. I read him the line several times and then asked if he was ready, and he said yes. We thought Jacob would have to prompt him, but as Jacob started recording, Ralph miraculously said the whole line. Then we began to talk. Dina, my wife, and then Fran joined us in the room, which had a beautiful large picture of Fran and Ralph on the wall facing Ralph. I asked him how he was doing, and he said, "Good," but he wished he did not have these bad memories. He went on to say how lucky he felt to have such a wonderful wife and to be married for so many years. And as Fran and Ralph held hands that morning, he went on to say how wonderful and loving his family is. And then he said, "I'm a very lucky man." Ralph's life had some major ups and downs from the very beginning of his life, but he persevered and was resilient. He found love and enriched the lives of many. He was a loving husband and father and a successful teacher, which may have been his true calling. Rest in peace and love, my big brother. Your little brother will miss you.
One of the places that my dad and I did a lot of speaking about was Judaism. Shouldn't surprise anybody. And so I got a chance to get his philosophy. Wasn't that misaligned with my own? So the passages that we've chosen to read capture him and the way he understood Judaism and the way he approached his own life. So before I invite my niece and nephew, Alon and Dari, to come up, I'll give you a couple seconds to collect yourselves, and I'll read this passage. Mourning is the price we pay for having the courage to love others. Even in grief, we know that the wonder of human life is too complex and too magnificent to be memorialized in endless pain. The gifts of spirit our loved ones gave us cannot be measured or weighed, nor can they be lost or even tarnished by time. Even in our darkest hours, we know that some of their light and their warmth will always be with us, bringing comfort and courage, and in the fullness of time, we know healing and peace. Guys ready? Front and center.
So we are lucky enough to be Ralph's grandkids. My name's Elon, this is Daria. And we grew up here in Denver and got to experience having both our grandparents very heavily involved in our life. And as such, we met with our brother Oriel over FaceTime. My mom got a great picture she'd love to show you. And got to spend some time reminiscing on our grandfather, the memories that we'd shared together. And then ultimately we decided to talk about some of the lessons that he was able to instill in us, both unintentionally and intentionally. So as such, I'll go forward. Our grandfather, or as we knew him, Saba, was much larger than life. He was a scholar of Judaism, as you heard in both speeches prior, and as he would say, everything else. He was an avid lover of the outdoors and a man who loved and took great pride in the family that he helped build. The three of us, my brother, my sister, and I, were lucky enough to grow up with our Saba deeply involved in our lives, and would like to share some of the lessons he taught us today. So we'd like to share the 10 lessons of Ralph, as he was affectionately known to our grandmother, through both good and bad.
Lesson number 1. Whenever Saba came over for Shabbat, he would beeline to our mom's perfectly stacked tower of cookies, freshly baked loaf of banana chocolate chip bread, or whatever was in store for dessert. And our mom would turn and immediately know that the missing piece was a result of her father. This also made a great scapegoat when our little children hands got in food before it was supposed to. But from this, we learned to eat dessert, whether that be before dinner, during dinner, or after dinner, and to love and enjoy what you eat, because some things, cookies, milkshakes, fudge bars, brownies, Reese's Cups, ice cream, and bacon, are just too good, no matter what your doctor or rabbi says.
Lesson number 2. During a particularly difficult visit to the assisted living community where he and my grandmother lived, I came upon him laying in his bed with his torso on the mattress, but his legs hanging off. At this point, he was unfortunately too weak to lift himself into bed. As I stepped up to him and worked to get him into my arms to put him into bed, he was busy trying to find my nipples so that he could give me a nipple twister. Thus, the second lesson was born. 1, your nipples are never safe. But 2, be goofy and have fun. No matter how tough the situation may be, even when you're too weak to put yourself into bed, always look for the good, even in those bad moments.
Number 3, sing the German nursery rhyme, even if you don't know any of the words. I was gonna sing it, but I don't really feel like that right now. But as we were reminiscing over the song and the countless times that we fell through his legs as he sang it, we all seem to remember very different versions of the words. But ultimately we learned that do everything you can to make your grandchildren giggle.
Number 4, in his later years, our Saba spent a great deal of time working with the park services and doing anything he could to be outdoors. It's here where he cemented his love of nature, but also his knack for staying on the trail and telling you off when you didn't. In this, you'll find the 4th lesson. Go out and enjoy the beauty of nature, but also respect it and leave the trail and ultimately the world better than you found it.
Number 5, cry at every Disney movie, every family event, when Obama wins, any birthday, at the skating rink, the soccer field, when your daughter finds her wedding dress, a goodbye hug, just cry all the time. And it's okay to cry, and it's okay to cry really loudly and with your whole body. This taught us that you should feel your emotions deeply and share them vulnerably.
Number 6, for those that got to experience the outdoors with our grandfather, specifically skiing or biking, you'd know that not only was he great at it, but he was kind of a beacon of fashion on the slopes and the hills. From this, take the 6th lesson. Don't be afraid to sport a purple or gold or really any other color that was cool in the 70s, but not so much anymore, ski suit on the hill well into your 70s, and always ride, hike, and ski the hardest terrain. even if it's against your better judgment and the judgment of those around. Enjoy the outdoors all the time, push yourself to try and do everything you can, and refuse to let age get in the way of doing the things that you love.
Number 7. When we were growing up, Saba would often pick us up from school if our parents were busy. And I remember one time cruising down the highway in his gold Jeep, and I asked him if God was a boy or a girl. To this, he replied that he didn't think God was a person. He said, God is the beautiful things in the world that you can feel but can't describe, like the feeling when you reach the summit of a long hike and look out over the world, or the feeling of love shared between people.
Number 8, the best way to sleep is naked. Honestly, we're not sure what the meaning is behind this one and don't think you should think about it too much.
Number 9, he taught us a good Jewish dogma to always ask questions. And maybe more importantly, always ask him, because he'll tell you the right answer. And perfectly on cue, our dad said yesterday that Ralph was the original Google. Through this, we learned to seek knowledge, be constantly curious, and always continue learning.
And finally, being Jewish is about bringing loved ones together and continuing the traditions that you hold dear, finding the meaning that's right for you and for the current moment. And it's okay if this changes over time. But the one thing that must always remain consistent was Grandma's brisket.
We know we said 10 lessons of Ralph, but in true form, Ralph was an overachiever. So we have one bonus lesson for you. Growing up and watching Saba have to hold Grandma's hand at all times taught us that when you find someone you love, hold them close. And maybe even share an email address where you smush your names together. fralf@msn.com, fralf2@gmail, or fralf3@yahoo.com. And also to welcome the people who your loved ones choose to hold closely into your family wholeheartedly.
And to leave you with our final departing lesson, the world's only and best dance move, courtesy of Ralph, our Saba.
That was good. Thanks. You captured it. So before I finish with some of my words, my memories, I want to just say some words of thanks. First and foremost, to all of you who were with my mom and with our family and with him and visited him and just offered him the comfort that friends bring. It meant a great deal. But you were also with him, many of you, for his good days. And you know some of the stories I'm going to tell. You recognize the character that I'm going to frame here. This will just be part of filling out the whole picture. I want to thank Buddha, who really gave incredible care to my dad, Buddha is married to Daria. Should I call you Terrell, or is Buddha's okay? So we know him as Buddha, married to my niece Daria, and he was present for my dad to help take care of him and really showed him incredible love and dedication. And then finally, Sharon. Because she really carried the ball here, and she did it with love and commitment and determination and strength. And I said thank you to her every time I spoke to her on the phone. I meant it. So, as you know, I had a long time to think about these words. And it will come as no surprise to you, since I'm Ralph's son, where I did most of my thinking, which was on the bike. But I thought, how do I frame my dad's life in a way that captures him and is honest and offers tribute to the man and the way he lived his life? So the concept that I came up with is to speak about his passions. Ralph was a man of many passions. Some lasted for years and others lasted just in the entire life, his lifetime. And some of them you'll recognize right off the bat. In fact, Alon and Daria spoke about love of the outdoors and that famous dance move that we all were subject to regularly. He was passionate about his embrace of some idea or some activity or a person, and that combined with his propensity towards, shall we say, persistence. If a passion was in his head, you were destined to hear about it many times. And if it was a passionate dislike, he'd let you know that too. By far, his longest running and most enthusiastic passion was my mother. Not only was she his companion in life, but she was his security, his anchor, the focus of his affections, in some ways his enabler. She was his favorite dance partner and cheerleader, his travel partner in biking and hiking. She remembers the way he teased her playfully. Sometimes she appreciated it, sometimes she said, "Ralph." She was the safe, warm, embracing, reassuring home that he returned to each day after his commute back and forth from Morristown, New Jersey to Manhattan. In fact, whenever he left her side, what he longed for most was to return there to that place of comfort he found and that place of unconditional love. She sustained him as master of the kitchen, nothing better than her cooking in his estimation. She became his dietitian as he aged. "Fran, can I eat this? Fran, can I eat that? What should I get, Fran? What should I order, Fran?" She managed his health, took care of his medications, and in all honesty, she was his sleep aid because he could not sleep unless she was in bed next to him. And that commitment, their commitment to each other, was in so many ways a template by which we who are in the shadow of their lives will judge our own loving relationships. Well, you know who's passionate about skiing and biking. Raise your hand if you're a fellow skier with him. I just want to see what a bunch of you. There you go. And a biker, any bikers? There we go. All right, so there it is. So we all owe our love, well, obsession with skiing to my dad, because from the first snowflakes on the East Coast in winter, where we would go out and literally try to catch them in our mouths and just wait till it collected in our driveway so he could drive his old blue Willys Jeep that eventually he had kept for so long that the floorboards rotted out and he fell through to the bottom when he was plowing our driveway. To that last melting muddy corn snow in the spring, our eyes were focused on the snow and the slopes. And of course, we passed that passion on to our kids, and we required it of our spouses as a condition for marriage. Even Gotti, who came from the sweltering sands of Tel Aviv, learned how to ski, and he learned how to like it. Same thing with biking and with exercise, and we've inherited a lot of those things. He was passionate about the weekly romps he took with Dan through the forest at our house in Morristown. And then, of course, there were other passions. There was a running phase. There was a men's clog phase. There was a men's purse phase, much to my teenage embarrassment. There was a ponytail phase. There was a passionate model airplane phase. There was a smoking a pipe, this was the pipe of tobacco phase. Yes, even in the car on our long car rides to Vermont, Ralph said, "Don't worry, the window's open," as we're all hacking and coughing in the car as he's smoking his pipe. He was passionate about the New York Times crossword puzzle. He attempted it and actually finished it most mornings. He was passionate about doing it himself, and he undertook a lot of ambitious projects, and he actually pulled it off most of the time. He had a complete supply of tools. I have to say, I inherited that proclivity. I didn't do such a good job passing it down, but Noah's learning. He was passionate about Israel. He was the chair of the National Men's Young Leadership Cabinet, what was then called UJA. He was a founding leader of an organization called Klal, which is a non-denominational Jewish organization devoted to leadership and learning for mostly Jewish professionals. That Becky and I devoted our careers to the Jewish communal service gave him something to excel about. Our family trips to Israel were memorable. He loved wandering into remote places of the country. I distinctly remember getting kicked out of the Church of the Nativity because that big Jewish nose of his was sticking it in a place that didn't belong. And some monk came over and said, "Get out of here." Throughout Israel, he started provocative conversations, or should I say, tension-ridden conversations with anyone who paused near him long enough to listen. They, of course, made good friends throughout Israel. I do remember sitting once in a cafe in Jerusalem, and Dad started asking the Palestinians about what life was like under Israel, and I was sure we were going to be the victims of terror any moment. Once he and Netanyahu partnered, that's Bibi, partnered on an anti-terrorism project, and he was an occasional visitor to our home. Netanyahu even hung a rope swing for us in Morristown, New Jersey, and Sharon reminded me he scrambled to the top hand over hand without using his legs. Of course, Netanyahu now was not one of my dad's favorite political figures. In fact, I think it's safe to say he was one of those unpassions my dad had. Dad wasn't into ritual, but he was passionate about Judaism. So when he decided to matriculate at Hebrew Union College during my years in rabbinical school, I had to say to him and set up some boundaries, which, if you know Ralph, boundaries were not his strong suit. I said, Ralph, Dad, you are not going to be in school when I come to Hebrew Union College. Let's just be clear about that. I will not be in school with my dad. So he transferred to JTS Uptown, and that was fine. He got his degree from them. And I went to rabbinical school with my rabbinical school friends saying, yeah, your dad was a hoot in class. We shared our love of Maimonides, biblical texts, and even Job. Surely you've heard that he taught about Job. Raise your hand if he mentioned Job to you. Exactly. Everybody heard him talk about it. He was passionate about weed, or as he called it, grass. I caught them smoking pot when I was in 7th grade, and I threatened to run away from home from my drug-abusing parents. Of course, in high school, I stole from his stash. He'd extol the benefits of grass regularly and inappropriately. He held court when my daughter, we were all gathered for her college graduation. He was sitting at the table with all the parents, and he went on and on and on. It was a Ralph talk, if you will, about the virtues of marijuana. And we just kind of all rolled our eyes and said, here he goes. At Rivka's wedding, where's Rivka? He went on and on and on with a captive audience as well. Here's the thing about my dad's passions. He couldn't understand why you didn't share them. Whatever he was thinking or doing was clearly the best, and you needed to hear about it. And if he wasn't passionate about something, well, you needed to hear that too. He was, with all well intents, chronically adolescent in so many ways. Perhaps that's why our own childhoods and adolescence were actually so much fun. They were characterized by the playful antics of our dad. My parents were the cool parents. Dad was in the pool with us. He was tossing it into the waves of the ocean. We were freezing our butts out, sledding in Morristown in winter. We enjoyed the woods in Morristown. As I said, he hiked with Dan almost weekly. Sharon remembers snuggling in the lounge chair, watching the bats fly overhead in our house in Morristown. He'd play his version of practical jokes on us. And when we would respond as kids and he didn't like what we did, he'd say, you need to respond in kind, only in kind. He was to his grandkids, silly Saba, our grandpa. He'd do the slapstick kind of humor that would make them giggle. And as they became adults and pursued their careers, he expressed his pride in all of them. Now, as you heard, we hinted at, being his child, his wife, his daughter, his son-in-law, his brother, wasn't always easy. The switch that controlled what came out of his mouth, well, it was just broken. And again, I can relate because mine is a little malfunctioning sometimes too. My daughter will attest to that. He offered opinions that were not always welcomed, not too different from any parent, but he seemed to push it over the edge. His obduracy about an idea sometimes drove us to distraction. He was not what I would characterize as flexible. Anything to do with the internet remained an obstacle he just could not overcome. After all, you couldn't take a drill or a saw or a hammer to it, so you couldn't fix it. He was easily offended if he didn't appreciate the sarcasm of some, guilty as charged, of offending him, I should say. But he was never malicious or possessed of malintent. He really wasn't. There was something refreshing about that youthful naivete and his capacity to be in the moment, especially when it came to his own life. The past was quickly forgotten. The future was too murky to anticipate. So wherever he was the best place to be. And he would tell you why. Over the last few years, his passion for life diminished more and more. He rallied for Dan and Joy's wedding. And yes, he got high there and he put on a Rasta hat and he danced that dance slightly with a little slower pace. But eventually, it just appeared that passion drained out of him. Though his death was long anticipated, we all now know that we enter a new phase as the casket is standing here before us. But I know we'll do just what we did here. We'll tell stories. We'll laugh. We'll make fun of him even when he can't defend himself. We'll grimace sometimes remembering some of the things he did. But we'll be reassured in knowing that so much of who he was still remains, because we will always carry his memories of his life, our memories of his life. And in truth, a little bit of him will always be in all of us. May he rest in peace. I sign ketubot and baby naming certificates and all kinds of Jewish documents, and I sign my Hebrew name. And I am the son of Eliezer. So now it's my moment when I invoke his name in his memory. And instead of leading with my name for the Amalei Rachamim, I lead with his. It's on the back of the little pamphlet you got as you walked in if you want to follow along. I'm going to share the English, and I actually have a translation that I like, which reflect his philosophy that I'll read. So please rise if you would. El Malei Rachamim, Shochein Bamramim, Hamsei Menucha Nechona Al Kanfei Hashriana, V'Ma'alot Kedoshim Utarim Kazahar Kia Ma'asirim Et Nishmat Eliezer Ben Moshe V'Rivka, Shalach L'Olamo, V'Gan Eden Tehei Menuchato, Ana Bal HaRachamim Hastirehu B'Setek V'Nafav L'Olamim, V'Yitzor B'Tzorachayim Et Nishmato, Adonai Hu Nachalato, V'Yanuach B'Shalom Amishkavo V'Nomar. Amen. And now this interpretation. May the source of life, the fountain of all being, open our hearts to compassion and our eyes to wisdom, that we might glimpse in perfect peace and sadness the way of all things. May our dads, our grandpas, our brothers, our husbands' memory be for our friends' memory be for us a blessing. And may we never let the light of his love grow dim in our hearts. May we remember all of his worthy and righteous deeds, and that his memory be forever bound up in the bond of our lives. God is our source and our destination, our beginning and our end. May Ralph's death awaken us to this truth, that the bond of love we shared and share will never be severed in sorrow. May he rest in peace, as we all say. Amen. I invite you to be seated, please. And if you would remain seated as we receive further instructions for how to proceed from here. I just want to add one thing before you come up, which is that we, his immediate family, have chosen to be the casket bearers. What I have learned over, oh, you can come close. I'm not going to talk for long, just 30 seconds. What I've learned is that when an opportunity comes for those intimate connections and the intimate involvement of family in even moments like this, that they're that much more deeply meaningful. So this is not to exclude any of his dear friends, because as I said, you were so important to him, but we, his grandchildren, are going to be the ones, and son, I think, what do we have? Ron, Dan, Noah, Ellie, Daria, Ilan, and Ari. Yes, grandchildren and son are going to be the ones, and son-in-law are going to be the ones to carry the casket to the grave.
Ladies and gentlemen, that does conclude our service here at Feldman Mortuary. Interment will be at Emmanuel Cemetery, which is within Fairmount. We were all invited to the interment. However, we're not going to be in an escorted procession today. So in your handouts are directions to the cemetery. If you'd like to join us, we'll ask you to start making your way as quickly as possible, just as we will be making our way just as quickly as possible. If you'd like to follow the hearse and some of the family cars, we need to ask you or remind you to follow all traffic laws. Just like we're going to stop at all stoplights, we need you to stop at all stoplights as well. One last request is please don't come forward and try to express your condolences to the family. It will delay their process in getting to the cemetery. Thank you all for your attendance.